Greetings, everyone. I'm Steve Clemens. I'm here today in my capacity as co-chair of the GLOBSEC US initiative. I'm actually talking to all of you from Doha right now, where I'm at the Global Security Forum that Ali Soufan, many of you know Ali Soufan's group put on, and so security is in the air. I just left Tallinn, Estonia, and the Leonard Meri conference, which was again kind of looking at the challenges right now in different ways, the stress points in the world, how we respond to them, not just within the transatlantic sphere,
Yes.
but far beyond. And so I think in this arena,
All right.
we have, I'm going to ask everyone to mute. Someone's getting in the way here, so please mute. Thank you. So I'd like to bring the chairman of our GLOBSEC USA to say a few words, Petr Pudl, but Petr, the floor is yours.
Good morning or afternoon or good evening to all places around the world. My name is Petr Pudl. I am chairman of GLOBSEC US Foundation. My background, I'm entrepreneur, also investor in United States, in special chemical business, focus on making mining of precious metal fancy again, but this is not the topic which I would like to talk. Well, GLOBSEC US Foundation is a part of the GLOBSEC universe. I assume that most of you at least heard about GLOBSEC as a leading transatlantic think tank with big presence in Europe, with flagship event GLOBSEC Forum organized in Central Europe. Our new edition 24 will be organized for the first time in Prague in the summer of this year. In the US, our GLOBSEC Foundation is focused to strengthen the dialogue between Europe and US on defense, security, and in much broader sense than traditional defense. But obviously, defense itself is getting to have a much bigger priority than like the decades before. Europe, we are like in the war with in Ukraine. Some people don't like to say that it's a war with Russia, but at least President Putin is declaring that this is a war against West. And we found that actually we are, as a Europe and US, much bigger economy than Russia. But if you look at some like minor details, Russia is preparing for a long-term war. The recent appointment of a new Minister of Defense is a clear indication of that, and it would be a war of industrial capacity. And I think it would be very interesting to listen your view how Europe and US is ready to be successful in that confrontation, which wouldn't be only about the high-tech weapons and systems, but it would be also about the ammunition capacity, about the basic stuff which Ukraine needs to defend their country. And we can only hope that Ukraine will be the only country which would face such a confrontation. So we would love to hear your opinion, how we are ready for such a massive industrial outreach to be also to face the Russian like a capacity war which are planning to do against us. So thank you for everyone who is participating, and I'm so much looking forward to listen your views.
Thank you so much, Petr. I'm going to get right down to our first member of Congress who's joining us, a friend, Stacey Plaskett, a representative, represents the Virgin Islands, and she is a member of the House Select Committee on Intelligence, part of the Defense Intelligence and Overhead Architecture Subcommittee, which oversees so many of these different programs. Representative Plaskett, it's really great to see you again. Look, this is a serious subject, and we convene this today with leading voices from the defense policy in Europe and the United States, many from Congress. And I'm just interested, as you look from what you know about the challenges of this moment, part of the inspiration of this was that there seemed to be some crushing needs now. And in my view, I think there's a question of how nimble we all are. So I'd love to get your take on where you see the strengths and weaknesses right now, particularly within the transatlantic relationship as we face mutual challenges. So Stacey Plaskett.
Thank you. And when you're saying the relationship, you're talking about the US's position with that. Well, thanks for this convening, and I've been listening to the other speakers. I think this is a really important discussion that we're having about our U.S. defense preparedness, as well as to the other type of defense that we do, which is the soft policy, and that's related to our engagement with our NATO allies, as well as those who are not necessarily our part of the NATO alliance. I think that that's something that the United States needs to continually work on. One of the things that I think is very important in the defense space is America's continued dominance in this area, which is really driven by our innovation that has allowed us to have this long-term competitive edge. Innovation being the securitization of the United States ability to move forward. I'm sorry, I think someone is not on mute.
I tell my team to please mute people who are not speaking. Thank you. Go ahead, Stacey.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine underscores the critical role that not only our defense in terms of arms has, but the NATO alliance itself, right? And our ability to work with these other countries and continue to have the type of relationship that will have create a sense of security among our allies that the U.S. is going to be there, that our word is our bond, so to speak. And if we say we're going to do something, we follow through with it. And so I think that that's the two pillars. One is our innovation, particularly in the defense space, and our ability to create arms and support our allies with the continuing expertise that we have in that area, as well as America's policy standing, our diplomatic standing with the alliance, to ensure that people know that when America says they're going to support, that we follow through.
Let me ask you a question about that. GLOBSEC, which has convened this today, has had a number of programs on the kind of geotech competition and race. And I've had the privilege of talking to a number of generals and admirals, and also people in the digital space, who've talked about the remarkable leaps that Ukraine has made in synthesizing software and the digitized battlefield. And, I won't even call it quick decision-making, instantaneous decision-making on targeting. And they reflect, I said, can we do this in the US? And they said, we have some real challenges when it comes to procurement challenges, that sort of synthesis. And so when you sort of talk about innovation and remaining ahead, my question to you is, are we ahead? I mean, are we seeing things today in Ukraine that the United States itself hasn't learned to do?
Well, I do believe we have. I mean, there's always room for growth, right? But I think through the creation and expansion of innovation-centric organizations, including the Defense Innovation Unit, Naval X, AFWER-X, and others, the Department of Defense has created pipelines that enable rapid transition of innovation ideals into fielded solutions, expanding opportunities for those smaller vendors to do work for the Department of Defense, as well as leveraging our commercial technologies. I think that we have and are able to, once we wrap our minds around it, America is the best at investing in emerging as well as disruptive technologies, whether that's AI, quantum, biotechnology, etc. I think we're the best at doing that. And I think we're going to see that more and more. I mean, Ukraine has been amazing in its application of the innovations that America has had. And I think, we have just got to keep pace with us and our partners' need in the speed of technological changes that we see not just in the battlefield, but then in times of peace as well, and how to use those innovations for economic expansion, economic growth. That's definitely going to be needed for our partners when peace occurs.
What would you say when it comes to our intelligence today is our biggest blind spot?
I mean, without saying what I'm not supposed to say, I always think that human is the area that I most worry about. Many of my colleagues talk quite a bit about cyber technologies and cybersecurity, the safety of our grids, etc. But I think that nothing can duplicate human. And I'm always concerned as we're looking to downsizing, as there are threats against DEI and others, that we do not have a nimble intelligence capacity that looks and thinks and operates and is culturally aware of all of our partners. I look at the budgets and I know that in areas like in Africa, we are taking away some of that human and deploying it in other areas. But, I think that right around the horizon, we're going to be very concerned about what's happening in the Sahel and our race against Russia and China for a continued democracy throughout the world.
And one last quick question that I've been asking is, I think on the broad side about building weapon systems or having, strong coordination, communication, control, having an innovative bases you talked about in intelligence. These are all parts of sort of, I would say, the strength. Many people say that's how you get to peace and that's how you deter. I'm just interested in cyber ops and the incredible effectiveness and the low cost of disrupting democratic societies through disinformation, et cetera, and whether or not you see an ecosystem of deterrence developing at all ever there. I mean, the CIA used to be good at disrupting other countries in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and I'm now wondering where that muscle memory is and whether or not we have to develop the ability to do what others are doing to the United States and some of our European partners.
Well, Steve, you're preaching my kind of language in that area. And I think more insidious and more problematic is Americans' denial, increasing denial of the fact that our adversaries are coming at us through misinformation and disinformation. There are attempts to try and take down the relationship between the private sector and the public sector and the private sector and government in sharing information about the work of, and it's not just China and Russia. We're seeing Iran starting in this area as well. And that misinformation and disinformation that is also done in places in third world countries, in areas that have fragile democracies, that will be problematic to us because many of those places, while we are looking at them as being economically not viable countries, most of them are natural resources rich. And that's something that our adversaries are really exploiting at this time.
Well, thank you very much. Representative Plaskett, we have a very big slew of people coming in today to sort of talk about this, sort of a talk show, I guess, on national security. I want to thank you for launching us and getting us started. You're welcome to hang out further with us, but I want to move now to talk with some of our European friends, at least two of them. We have a third who will come in down the way. Everybody's operating a just-in-time, like let's catch the wave modus operandi here. But we have my new friend, Richard Kols, who's a member of parliament and chair of the Foreign Relations Committee of the parliament in Latvia. As I mentioned, I just met him in the Leonard Mary conference, and I'm a big ideas guy, and he put some big ideas on the table there, and I thought it was very important. And we also have Denis Mercier. He's the former chief of the French Air Force and Supreme Allied Commander for Transformation in NATO. And I should tell you, at some point in this conference, we'll have my good friend, Ambassador Katarina Maternova, who is the EU ambassador to Ukraine and in Kiev right now. And I know that Katarina's people are listening, and hello, Peter and everyone. So We will bring Katerina in at a later point in the program. But let me just start with you, Rihards. When we were in Tallinn, you put a big idea on the table, and it had to do, in this case, with the crushing immediate need of resources for Ukraine and its struggle with Russia. There's been a debate about sovereign bank assets that various nations hold from Russia. There's a lot of it in Belgium, and I'm just interested. Go ahead, tell us what your big idea is.
Well, Steve, thank you. It was really to meet you first in Tallinn, and hi to everyone near and far. Just coming on that, it's not about big ideas, but it's about the sense of urgency. What is happening in Eastern Ukraine is something that really the information coming in is alarming. I would say it's absolutely alarming. We can, continue to clap on our shoulders saying that we delivered 50 billion decision in EU, we delivered in US 60 billion. It's not enough. It's not even close, because it has to be understood that biggest chunk of this money is actually something that Ukraine has already paid. So the leftovers is 1/3 of those funds allocated for the Ukraine to allocate to buy new military equipment. So this means we have to act more decisively. I welcome the decisions right now. Well, decision is not made, but at least it's being put on a table within the NATO to commit for 100 billion for Ukraine for the next 5 years. Let's see how it will be delivered at the NATO summit in Washington. Let's hope that there is a consensus within the NATO. But what we can do on the sidelines of that, on the sidelines, of course, the ongoing discussion is the frozen assets. And I'm not talking about the private entities, be it the physical persons or legal entities, but I'm talking about the frozen assets of the Russian sovereign funds, central bank assets that are, as you mentioned, the biggest chunk lays in Brussels, in their financial entities. And the question is, do we have the legal framework? So it happens that actually over the weekend, there much things have developed in Europe, Steve. I have to mention that European Union has given a legal framework across the board in EU that violating sanctions is criminal offense. This for the first time. This was also a challenge because we had so different regulations at the national level. In some member states, it was administrative fine and so on. So now it's been harmonized. The offense, bypassing, circumventing, violating, it's already criminal offense. That's one big step where right now it's being announced and the decision is made. The second one is that we have now delivered on this legal framework for member states to have the legal rights to use the accumulated wealth from those frozen assets. So here I'm talking about the windfall interest rates. So if we take for example Belgium, that holds the biggest chunk, around 190 billion Russian central bank assets, they generate around 3 to 4 billion annually in interest rates. So right now they have the legal rights to take this money and deliver it for Ukraine's reconstruction or provide them with the military assistance that they can procure. But there's a twist. What I'm being suggesting that we can amplify this sum 10 times. We should actually use these 3 to 4 billion as an interest rate that we're going to pay for a loan that we're going to take for Ukraine, be it 30 or 40 billion. And of course, I'm not talking about international lenders. They have preconditionalities and whatnot. Let's keep this money still from within the Europe or European Economic Zone. And I'm looking no further than the Nordic countries. If you look, the Norwegian welfare sovereign fund, it amounts up to 1.6 trillion. I guess those folks have the means to actually provide this kind of loan. And if you tell them, look, if you provide this loan, we're going to give you back 10% of that, they will not find a better deal in the world. So they will have the moral ground as well. They're supporting the right cause. And also we can extend the support to Ukraine through this means as well. Sorry for
so basically,
rather large
get a $30 or $40 billion instrument out there, and then use the growth and gains of the Belgium fund to basically fund that loan, which you would then deliver for. I should also mention it's not just for immediate arms, but we're also looking at how you rebuild the Ukrainian defense industry. Thank you. Well, that gets me to another point, and I also want to tell our team that Jacques Pitalode, who's the ambassador of Switzerland in the United States and former head of intelligence in Switzerland, is a great thinker, like many of you on this. Bring him into the conversation as well if he wants to be. I'd love to see his face. But let me ask General Mercier. General, one of the things that also inspired today's program was the numbers, ammo, basic systems. Jake Sullivan, the president's national security advisor here in Washington, told a group of us on an occasion that it's going to be interceptors and ammo that determine the outcome of this battle, and we don't make enough of them. And so defense production is something that's been on my mind and what the barriers are. I also learned from a forum that GLOBSEC held that we had a total capacity in Europe of 300,000 units a year before this conflict began. That's now grown. So companies like CSG have an annual production of about 300,000 units. But at the beginning of this conflict, Russia was sitting on 14 million units. So when you look at the incredible disparity between even ammo, I'm just interested in your thoughts on procurement, production, what our blind spots are there. Are we just all pretending this isn't a problem? And is it a problem?
Yeah, thank you very much. And it gives me the opportunity to share a few thoughts about this. And as I mentioned to you just before the meeting, and I'm a former military leader, but I'm now in the industry, and I can see both sides of the game, which is I think very important. And if I'm back to deterrence, there are three criteria for me that are essential for deterrence. The first is credibility. The second is the political resolve to use our forces. And the third is the strategic communication that goes with that. But when I talk about the credibility, we have always considered the credibility of our forces, that we have the right forces, we have the modern forces, we have the right command and control, but and we have the capability to innovate. There is something we are lacking, is the possibility, if we have the appropriate money, the possibility to manufacture our systems very quickly and to get the number of systems that we need in case something happens. We thought in the past we had time, and we see that we do not have. And I would like to share a few considerations how we would consider this. And first, you know, in NATO, I don't know if everybody is familiar with what we call the NATO defense planning process. Roughly, the NATO defense planning process is every 4 years, the NATO allies 32 nations at the head of state and government. They approve a political guidance to say this is what NATO should be able to deal with. And then the two military leaders, the SACEUR and the SACTI in NATO, they do an assessment of if this is what you want at the political level, this is what you need at the military level. And then we look at what exists in the nation, we make a gap assessment, and we come back to the nation and say, look, this is what you need to get in order to fill this gap and have the full capacity to fight together. That's the first thing, but we do that for the tanks, for the aircraft, the ships, and all the military capabilities. But we have never done that for the industry. And this is very important for me to have these kind of things where we could say what exists. We have huge capacities in both sides of the Atlantic regarding the industry in order to manufacture military capabilities. But we have never made an assessment of what this industry is capable of. And that's very important that we could conduct this kind of survey and this kind of process in order to have the complete view of what we are able to do in case of we have to produce a lot of weapons, a lot of ammunition, drones, and everything. So that's the first point. The second point is we do not have really agility in this industry because over the past years, the industry adapted to the budget procurement laws, to the budget procurement and the defense budget, and they just scaled their capacities accordingly. And today we see that we need to not only scale the capacities with regard to what we deal with in terms of crisis today, but what would be the worst case scenario. And that's difficult, and there are possibilities to do things differently. In many areas, I'm thinking about drones, weapons, spare parts, maintenance, repairs, operations. We have the capacity to innovate a lot in this in these domains, and to associate, not only see what a drone is, but if you want to produce a drone, and we see in Ukraine they are massively used in the fight against Russia. A drone, you need to produce it quickly, very cheap, and on demand. And to do that, you need to think the manufacturing from the beginning. And if you think your drone as you thought your aircraft before, is going to be expensive, it's going to be long to produce, and you will be wrong. So for a lot of capacities, we have this possibility to make research, to spend money, and see how our manufacturing could be different. That's the first point. Another thing is, if we speak about a tank,
just short form,
a fighter aircraft, a ship, it will be difficult to produce them on demand. But there are other ways to do that, and how we build our resilience. You know, today we see many nations when they sell military capacities, they sell offset as well. So that means many of the countries, they say that I buy your capacity, I need to have some industry in my country. But the question of offset is a whole question for me. The question is how we build resilience and say we sell military capabilities. We need to be sure that we multiply when we do that with our allies, even with our partners. The possibility for them to have manufacturing capacities, not only for offset, but to build the resilience and expand the number of factories that we have in case we have to produce more. And that's something I think we could develop, and even incentive to the military companies who sell abroad their capacities. Another thing is we have seen in the COVID, I have in mind, I'm in the board of automotive supplier. And what I've seen in the COVID crisis, those guys, they make automotives. And in the COVID crisis, because we are lacking masks in Europe, in 2 months, they produce thousands of masks. Why? Because the automotive sector, they are able to produce very quickly, very fast, with huge processes, everything you want. So do we have some kind of industries that are not directly related to the defense industries, but we can...
Well, that's what the United States has with the Defense Production Act.
And I see that, speaking frankly, I see many things like this developing in US. It's slower in Europe, but it's very important that both US and Europe, we adopt the same kind of pace in order to develop all these ideas in the industry. Because this is our...
We got to close it up.
That is behind that.
Okay, great. I apologize. Look, I want to ask you both very quickly. Representative Jim Himes has joined us, and I want to bring him into the conversation as well. But let me just ask you, we just went through a long period where we've got Adam Kinzinger, who'll be joining us in just a bit. And, Adam was basically advocating for his former GOP colleagues to do the right thing, to basically provide the various aid and support for Ukraine. That finally came through. It was a long, arduous process that raised significant doubts about whether that would happen. What happened within NATO in response to that period of purgatory? Was there doubt in the US when it came? And I want you to be honest if you can. Did it send a shockwave through NATO that America might not be there in that important moment? Rehards?
Well, obviously we were worried. And as Parliament representatives, I traveled, I think from October till beginning of April, I was 3 times in Washington, D.C. And I have to say, and this is for the first time, I've been in Parliament affairs for the past 10 years, and for the past 5, I've been chairing the foreign affairs. And this was the first time when the 3 chairs from the Baltics traveling, doors are closed. No one is willing to meet us. Everyone is preoccupied with the domestic issues, which we don't deny that there are challenges, of course. But what we were there is actually to put really raise the sense of urgency. And well, I have to see we can, as I mentioned, suddenly the supplementary item of 60 billion, it became as symbol for U.S. credibility. That was what was at stake. Yes, U.S. delivered, and well, the question right now is how we're going to work, and this is our task for let's say Baltic colleagues, to engage with 120 those who voted against and try to convince them to be on the right side of the history. And
General,
just the last
Yeah.
comparison.
Yeah.
Please compare the Lend-Lease vote in 1941 with the vote right now with the supplementary item. It's just one-on-one.
It's very scary sometimes to look back at history. General Mercier, real 30 seconds if you can.
Just one thing is, if I look at NATO, there is one thing which is very important and that does not exist in any other organization. This is we have two operational command, ACO, which is in charge of the current operation, and ACT, which is in charge of the future operation, and how we use both command in order to deal with the current operation. But we have a full operational command looking at operational issues to see how we will continue to fight in the future together. And that's very important. And that's this is a huge value for NATO to have these both commands working together.
Thank you very much. Let's bring in, let's move to, and gentlemen, you're welcome to stay with us, but let's move to Representative Jim Himes, who is the ranking member of the Select Committee on Intelligence. It's great to have Jim here. He is a good friend, and he is joining us. He's got a heart out, so I want to make sure I get Jim's views on this. And Jim, let me just start out. I'm going to ask a political question. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, many people thought stepped forward, supported the aid package to Ukraine as well to Israel, Gaza, Taiwan, and so on. And members of both parties supported his remaining in state. He was not, the motion to vacate did not proceed. And I'm just interested, are we back to a moment where maybe politics ends at water's edge, or do these issues remain highly divisive between the parties? Jim?
Yeah, Steve, thank you for having me. No, sadly, I wish I could report that we're back to a moment where politics ends at the water's edge, but no, very much it does not. And we see this every week on CODELs, particularly as we go into November, particularly as the Republicans sort of sharpen their attack.
So when you talk about CODELs, you mean split CODELs not going together, or?
No. I mean, when, every week when these delegations return, press reports are of, what used to be sort of a violation of the norms, which is, Republicans attacking President Biden, Democrats, talking about their fears around the possibility of a President Trump. So the answer to your question is no. We remain massively polarized. And what has happened is that, particularly now, remember where I work in the House, the Republicans are in a majority, so they're the party that matters. If you think about that Ukraine vote, every single Democrat, and it's split roughly 50-50, as you know, the Republicans have whatever it is, a 2-vote majority, but every single Democrat voted in support of Ukraine aid, whereas the Republicans were split in half. And I heard you say that Adam Kinzinger, I have thoughts on why that is, but Adam Kinzinger, who lived inside the Republican conference, that's where the isolationist movement lives today. And, we need to grapple with that, because what has happened is there's articles out there about how we've sort of established a centrist governing coalition, sort of, right? I mean, if the alternative is handing the keys to Marjorie Taylor Greene or the extreme elements, to passing a budget, to actually getting a package of aid done, we will choose the latter. But it is very much on a razor's edge with respect to, and frankly, that razor's edge is just as you accurately point out, how much internal dissent in the Republican majority can Speaker Johnson handle?
I'm going to do something unusual here, because my friend Bill Galston is on from Brookings, very prominent voice in all sorts of policy issues, but he's on, he has a hard stop when you do. Let me bring Bill Galston on for a moment, Naharika. I want him to ask this great question and give him credit for it. Bill, you with us? Well, I'm going to ask Bill's question. Okay, great. Bill, go ahead, Bill.
I think I'm unmuted now. This is all very interesting, but with the immediate crisis in Ukraine, the issue is numbers. This is a war.
Let's do short form, Bill.
Yep. Yeah. Can't substitute quality for quantity. Russia is now on a war footing, producing 3 million 155 millimeter shells per year.
And started with 14 million at the beginning. They had 14 million at the beginning of the conflict. Yeah.
Okay. And the EU and the US together can't get close to that number and are not on track to do so. What can we do about that?
Great. Jim, I'd love to get that, because these number games issues is something that Senator Vance had raised as well. But how do we basically deal with that dimension of production asynchroncies between what you need in these kinds of conflicts? And does it leave the United States in a way? This has been some of the criticisms of Mike McCall and others. Do we leave ourselves in a deficit in the United States and our other nations a deficit because we've basically offloaded so much to Ukraine?
Yeah, good question, and good to see you, Bill. Look, I think it's a terrible mistake to say that the numbers are determinative. Anybody who has ever fought a conflict will tell you that, yes, numbers really do matter, but they're not determinative. Just to give you an example that applies to Ukraine, there is a radical adjustment that must be made to the numbers calculation when you are defending your homeland with the support of the world versus, participating in a corrupt invasion of someone else's homeland. That matters. That really matters. It is also true that, and again, I'm not in any way dismissing the importance of numbers. I'm just making the point that it is a factor. It is also true that qualitative considerations are not absent in Ukraine. The intelligence sharing that we are doing, this is my world, right, in the intelligence community, the intelligence sharing that we are doing in Ukraine is not something that the Russians can replicate. One ally handing intelligence to the other. So I wouldn't, Bill's point remains. And frankly, it's not just about 155 artillery shells. It's also fundamentally about the fact that a system has developed in which primarily China, but also India, are feeding the Russian economy by buying very cheap oil and gas. And that is providing the resources necessary for the Russians to operate. And so why do I say all that? I say all that because we cannot fix the fact that Russia has a dramatically larger population of military-age males than Ukraine. But we can continue to work on the Chinese and the Indians, as difficult as that task may seem. And we can continue to emphasize those areas where there are qualitative differences. Intelligence sharing, by the way, one thing I would highlight, because it's been lighting my hair on fire this week. Right. I compliment the president for doing what we need to do, but we need to do more than what we need to do. We need to finally get to the battlefield not a day late, right? And 90 of us wrote a letter to the president saying we've really got to lean into this a little bit more. We're not going to see a wing of F-16s flying on Moscow, but we absolutely need to permit the Ukrainians to take out the artillery that they have stationed around Belgorod that is now operating with impunity because we have a restriction on the use of our weaponry over the Russian border. So I wouldn't dismiss the importance of numbers, but it's just one factor in how this plays out.
But go back and Jim, please restate that, because I think what you've been an advocate of, which is removing, part of the question that I've had since the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, which the United States had phenomenal intelligence on at the time, but what was the sense that the White House's fear of escalation, of arming Ukraine with weapons that it would have under control that could drive an escalation. And there was a sense, and I remember, frankly, last year at Leonard Mary conference in Estonia, that America was driving this to a frozen conflict. Do you believe that that's what the White House was doing? And now you're advocating a change in position and want those, essentially constraints removed?
Well, Steve, let's give the White House credit. First of all, they're the ones responsible for making sure, not the legislature, they're the ones responsible for making sure that this does not spiral into a
But I just want to say, you're calling for a change in policy, right?
Absolutely. I'm calling for, the lifting of the restrictions of the use of American weapons in a conditioned way. Again, I don't want F-16s flying towards Moscow, but I absolutely do want ATACMS used to take out the artillery that is stationed just 15 miles over there, or whatever it is, 10 miles over the Ukrainian border. But Steve, strategically speaking, you can't blame the White House for initially being cautious, right? This is something that we did not anticipate, that we'd never seen before, the possibility of a Russian attack on a NATO country. Where are the red lines? What's happening? We've been at this for a little while. And I'll give you my opinion, but I think it's backed by the sort of analysis of the American government. Putin is, except for in the most extreme circumstances of the threat of regime change, not going to use a nuclear weapon. The Chinese have been very clear about what happens if he does that. Number two, he is not anytime soon going to invade a NATO country. And we learned that long ago. And so what I fear didn't happen is absolutely in the first 2-3 months of this, we should have been enormously cautious because no red lines had been drawn. We had no real sense of Russian capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. We're now in a world where the question is, 10 years from now, will the story be that the West did what it needed to do to reverse an attack on the rules-based order, or did it not? And to date, the answer has only been kind of 60%. And so we really need to lean into this, learning what we have learned in the last couple of months.
But look, Jim, two quick things, and I want to mention I know you have a hard stop in 4 minutes. Adam Kinzinger has joined us. Great to see you, Adam. We'll have him on in just a moment. I have two really big. We have the NATO summit coming up in July in Washington, D.C. It's going to be an interesting moment, because it's an election year. You've got NATO summit here in Washington. Will be interesting to see what former President Trump says about that. But I can hear embedded in your comments while you are debating the National Defense Authorization Act this year, whether or not there is a kind of incrementalism as we're thinking about defense priorities, or whether there needs to be a strategic leap. And the thing going on in the back of my mind, and I can hear it in your comments, is whether America, if it hadn't come through with the Ukraine aid package, I'm interested, is there going to be a Suez crisis moment for the perception of U.S. leadership in the world? And are we running the risk, if we don't get some of these alignments right, where America can go from being a very big, important power with a lot of mystique to one that, like the UK in the 1950s, all of a sudden becomes quite diminished?
Steve, we're not becoming diminished anytime soon. And I could quote, we were talking numbers earlier, there's 7,000 satellites orbiting the Earth right now. About half of them are ours, right? I mean, we've got 11 or 12
so we've got capacity.
I mean, I could keep naming numbers. And so, no, we're not anywhere close to being a diminished 1960s, post-imperial Great Britain. We have some very severe internal fights happening, some of which are rooted in American traditional isolationism, some of which are unique to Donald Trump and what he happens to think about Ukraine on any given day. Adam Kinzinger will be best able to talk about that stuff. But so we've got that to deal with. Frankly, NATO is a pretty amazing story in the last year or so, right? Putin, in his wildest imagination, never imagined that Germany would be dedicating itself to the 2%. Never imagined, that Sweden and Finland would join. What needs to happen now, in my humble opinion, is, and I think this is consistent with some interesting comments that President Macron has made, both for its own sake, but also for American political reasons. Europe really needs to develop its defense industrial base, right? I mean, you can put forward units, et cetera, but Europe really, in some combined or fragmented way, really needs to develop its own defense industrial base. Without that, somebody like Donald Trump is always going to be able to say they are freeloaders. And as much as I don't particularly appreciate that point of view, and I would never use that language, the man's not entirely wrong. We're moving to a world in which most European countries will get to the 2% of GDP in spending, but that's certainly not where we were 5 years ago.
Right. 1 minute, Jim. Is our intelligence capacity as good as Russia's?
It's far better, Steve. Far better.
Do we use it as muscularly as Russia?
Well, it's funny when you say muscularly. I'm not sure whether you mean. I mean, we operate our intelligence apparatus consistent with the enlightened ideas in the Constitution. So we don't turn it against political dissidents the way the Russians do. So your question is broad enough that it's hard for me to answer. But I will tell you that in that area we have a dramatic qualitative edge because of technology and competence. And we also have something that the Russians don't have yet with the Chinese, which is the Five Eyes, where our NATO partners in particular, but also the Five Eyes, are working together in a way that makes our activities more than the sum of the parts.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us, Representative Jim Hines, who's ranking member of the Select Committee on Intelligence. I know you've got a hard stop, and I'm going to bring your former GOP congressman continue this conversation. So, Jim, thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Hey, Jim. Good to see you.
Hey, Adam.
Adam, there we go. God, Adam still looks like he's in a congressional office.
You know, you try to hang on to any vestige of people care about you that you can when you get out of that job.
Oh, we have that. So I want to tell everybody that Adam Kinzinger was also piloting the Air National Guard, former congressman from Illinois. And he has been someone who, when it comes to these issues on defense preparedness, America's, principled engagement in the world, I was with remarkable, shows how things go in a circle. I was with John Bolton the other day, and John was, Ambassador John Bolton was not somebody I basically share a lot of worldview with, but we become kind of friends. And he's out there basically saying, I'm going senator to senator to provide to stop this slip in the GOP towards isolationism. And to hear and think about John Bolton saying and articulating those words that way and his concern is for many of us a real a change in mental map. But Adam, it's great to see you. Look, we have the NATO summit coming up. We have the National Defense Authorization Act coming up. You've been one of the most candid people about where you see blind spots. We have many friends from Europe right now online. We have we'll bring her in a moment, the EU ambassador to the Ukraine, who's in Kiev right now, Katerina Mafanova. And I'd love to get your take on not the rah-rah stuff, but what do we have to fix?
Well, let me first off say too, when you talk about your friendship with John Bolton, and it's great to see everybody, by the way.
Semi-friendship.
Well, let's call it your semi-friendship. Yeah, your acquaintanceship, your newfound, I guess, mutual respect, I guess.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that going on. I mean, look, some of my best friends now are Democrats, and I'm a former Republican, because what you have and this is going into this question, you have this churn in the United States, this political realignment. And really what's happened is the Republican Party has become the isolation party, which the Democrats, quite honestly, used to be a little more isolationist. And the Democrats it's not like they've become hawks necessarily, but in contrast to Republicans, they've become the hawks. So it's been interesting. In terms of what do we need to do going forward, whether it's NATO generally or Ukraine. And I'll talk about the GOP side, because I think the Democrats are pretty trustworthy on the Ukraine issue, although it is time for the administration to unleash Ukraine to use American weapons on Russian equipment in Russia. I need to make that point now. But look, one of the things, so I have a political organization, and part of what we're doing right now is making sure that we're continuing to pressure Republicans for the next Ukraine vote. So I think
Adam, tell people the name of the organization.
Yeah, it's Country First. It's country, the number one ST.com. And I don't say that to promote it, except to say my concern is that we're sitting here saying, good, we got the 60 billion passed, we're good. Well, we all know that we're going to have to go back to the well at some point again and get more money. And that's why it's important for us now. And I would say this to every one of you, whether you're in the United States, whether you're in Europe, elsewhere, or you talk to American policymakers, never rest on making the case for Ukraine and Ukraine aid. So the thing I would say is we have to not wait until the very end to start bringing the pressure again. The pressure has to come now. So that's what I would say in the near term is our biggest challenge.
What do you think NATO as a transatlantic? Because I think there is a dimension. I mean, I'm going to just be candid. Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think NATO had some wobbliness in it, and there was a little more discussion. We heard President Macron of France say that NATO was brain dead. Much more talk about strategic autonomy in Europe. You could feel palpably the tension. And then the invasion happened, and transatlantic NATO relations never been better, never been more vital. And my question inside is, if you needed an invasion of Ukraine to prove the value of the relationship, isn't that relationship in trouble? We have a NATO summit coming up in July. What do you think about how wobbly or not, I mean, how reactive that relationship is versus how proactive it needs to be?
Well, I think it's a very reactive relationship. I don't necessarily think that, it's a bad sign that it took the invasion of Ukraine for this kind of rejuvenation, this 21st century enlightened NATO thing, because look, I mean, the reality is humans get bored We look for drama. If we don't have drama, we look to ourselves for drama, which is kind of what's happening in the United States. Our enemies become ourselves because we really don't see ourselves having an enemy. And so, you know, with NATO, it was kind of like, well, what's the point? What are we doing here? You know, we're all like, the Russians aren't really a big threat. And then they became a threat. And so I think that's normal. I think it's normal for kind of an atrophy of an organization and then to occasionally be reminded of its importance. But your second part of the question was what? Like, what? I forget what that was, your follow-up on that.
Well, you know, I think the big thing is there a way that when the NATO summit is here, of being proactive rather than reactive?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's
about needs.
There's a couple things. First off, there are a few members still wobbly in NATO. We need to be very vigilant about that. Hungary, we all know, right? We don't know what's going to happen with Slovakia. You know, so there's that. The other thing is we need to continue to push our allies to provide as much weaponry as possible, much offensive weaponry as possible. And I'd say again, it's all about.
So let me stop you there for a minute, because one of the big questions we have in today as we're talking, you know, we were actually going to do something kind of that would make most people's eyes glaze over and sort of talk about the bureaucracy of war, which among people in the defense industry is a really popular subject. You get out, it's not, so we didn't use that title. But the issue is when we talk about needing more offensive weapons production or more weapons production, I think, you know, you get into questions like permits, permitting reform, all these kinds of interesting things in capacity, which people don't want to hear about, but you don't have a magic wand. You actually have to go make and produce this stuff. And right now, the manufacturing capacity is at, you know, enormous highs. And I'm just interested, as we say that, I'm going to punctuate that in a moment. Do we need to kind of have a greater national discussion about what we need to do to bring on more capacity?
Yeah, so let's take it. It's similar in my mind to post-COVID. You know, at COVID, we realized that we had a very serious supply chain issue. We realized we had a manufacturing issue, that, you know, our medicinal supply was too reliant on China. And we started to think in terms of a national strategy. You guys might want to mute whoever just told somebody to enjoy their walk. So
can I tell my team, please keep everyone muted who is not with me speaking? Thank you.
You know, when we have and for Republicans, this is kind of anathema. We started to think, what is the government's role in ensuring that the right stuff is being produced, ensuring that the government can help subsidize areas where it doesn't make sense? We have to do that on the defense sector. So right now, the capacity we have to manufacture is getting pretty close to maximized. The question is, are we building new factories? Not really. We're not building new stuff to build 155. Are we creating contracts that are long enough to incentivize private sector investment in things like 155 shell production? Well, you actually make a lot less money on the production of weapons than you do on like innovation and stuff like that. How does the government can step in and help that? And I think that's how we have to be thinking. It's, you know, we have a Defense Production Act for a reason, because we understand the importance of the government making a decision on production. That's what we have to start thinking through, I think, because this industrial capacity is really going to be the defining thing of, does, you know, Russia win against Ukraine, or frankly, what is our ability to stand up against China and Taiwan?
I'm just going to do something unusual here. Uli Finkenbush, unmute yourself if you're online, but do it fast.
I'm right here.
Are you there?
I'm here.
So you heard, guys, you're one of the people, frankly, I'm going to out you, who liked my concept of the bureaucracy of war. So just respond to Adam real quick, or if you have a question or comment. But basically, what do we need to do, in your view, to get to tighten up some of the wobbliness that I may have commented on, or that may be seeing?
So first off, thanks to GLOBSEC for this conversation. I think it's really great. Agree with many speakers that raised this issue before. I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for transatlantic partnership. We got to meet the moment. It's pretty plain that both sides need the other very much, Europe and America. And I think we should be creative about what the kind of models are that we can explore. I think if I look at, for example, AUKUS, that has brought to bear a few very interesting ways of collaborating on technologies, but as well as capacity. And it's really built on trust, understanding that all players in AUKUS are in good times and bad times. And I think over to Europe, I think there's an opportunity to think about similar approaches, much deeper integration.
Well, thank you. Adam, if you're cool with it, I'm going to bring on EU ambassador to Ukraine, who's in Ukraine now, Katerina Mafanova, great friend, and love to have a conversation with her, with you. And basically, Katerina, thank you. You've heard parts of the discussion, and I know your team has followed this. But again, I'm trying to get at our blind spots, weak spots, stumbling spots as you sort of look at the common agenda out there between NATO nations, the EU, and you don't represent NATO, but you do represent the EU, and would be interested in your take on this moment. You have a former congressman who's a very important national voice on security. From your perspective, where does the security relationship blind spots today?
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for inviting me. Great honor meeting you, Congressman, virtually. And I will answer with a direct response, and then we'll have a few reflections on the previous conversations as well. And especially because of the comment made by our friend from Lockheed Martin, I think that the biggest blind spot that we have right now is actually procuring in Ukraine. The level of innovation, the level of defense innovation, the level of ingenuity that the necessity forced Ukrainians into is remarkable. The level of development, for example, the naval drones that, as of yesterday, destroyed all missile carrying ships in the Black Sea. They have no longer any, thanks to their made drones by themselves. And it's actually quite surprising to me how little defense actors on both in Europe and the US use it, because how better to test your new kit than in wartime. So I think this is the biggest blind spot, is this.
Okay, go ahead.
And the second one, I very much agree with the comments that both congressmen made. You know, now is the time to make case for Ukraine. I mean, they are essentially defending themselves with their hands tied. So first, they attempted an offensive without air cover, something no Western army even trains for. The Normandy landing had air cover 80 years ago. And now they have these restrictions put.
And the Air Force pilot is agreeing with you.
And it's really, as Congressman Himes mentioned, it's not about flying F-16s on Moscow. It's about destroying the kid that's right on the other side of the border, and we tied our hands. So I think that's the second blind spot. And the third one is the level of disinformation that the Russians are. You asked the previous speaker whether Russians or the US have better intelligence. I have absolutely no doubt it's the US and the West has better intelligence, but they are much better at disinformation, at corrupting elites and disinformation. And I think there is a lot of sort of mythology that we respond to still, or disinformation rather than the reality. So these are the three blind spots I see. And my last sentence is that, guys, we have agency. It's the West that has agency in this war. And it is a Suez moment, because we will determine whether they win or not.
Well, let me ask Adam to respond to any thoughts and bring on any other issues. We have Jake Auchincloss, a member of Congress who's been very active on the Select Committee on China, intelligence, and is kind of a broad swath of concerns. I'm going to get into something that I'm going to discuss with Jake in a moment with the ambassador. But Adam, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, it's really basic, and I like what the ambassador said at the very end, which is we get to determine our future here. We've got to get, look, if you take the economy of Europe and the economy of the United States, generally Europe and the United States are roughly equal economies, right? Nothing against Italy. We love Italy. Russia's economy is the size of just one EU member, Italy. We get to determine the future of Ukraine, the future of Europe, and it's Russia that should fear escalation. I think that's the big thing. We used to, as Americans, call out Soviet nuclear bluffs and know they weren't using it and go about our days and do our foreign policy, and we crushed the Soviet Union. I think this is where it's important. We have atrophied those muscles of strength. And this is where it's important for us to remember that we get to determine what the future of Ukraine is. And by the way, it is international law, which is pretty conservative, that allows Ukraine to destroy Russian material in Russia. We know the Biden administration will get there eventually. Look, they've done an okay job in Ukraine, way better than the Trump administration would do. We know they're going to get there eventually. The earlier, the better. That's what I have to say. Thanks.
Katharina, let me ask you a quick question before I bring on Representative Auchincloss. We have all watched Adam Kinzinger become a kind of conscience in the foreign policy area of views. And I know him, you kind of sort of see how both reacting to isolationism in the GOP, but kind of looking at, how do you make the proactive, positive case for American engagement in the world? I would say in Europe, you also have a kind of, I don't know what they called it, a deterioration, but a different focus. I interviewed at the conference I'm at now, the Global Security Forum, former Trump National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien today. And Robert O'Brien is very hawkish on Russia. And I said, wow, that doesn't sound like the Donald Trump I've heard. It doesn't sound like the Tucker Carlson dovish wing on Russia. Much more hard line on Russia. And so it just made me think that there are these divides within different camps. And there are now divides in Europe. I won't say the H word, but you know which country I'm talking about. There may be others that begin. How hard is it for you to play a role synthesizing a consistent message on these European issues with Ukraine?
Well, I think that one thing I want to say, that the EU itself, the institutions in Brussels and member states, have become security actors as a result of the full-scale invasion in quite unprecedented ways. And even EU budget instruments used for the purchase of weapons under a name of peace facility, a little bit Orwellian.
Right.
And it's true that the EU consensus is not as easy to come by, but has been consistent. We are now preparing 14th round of sanctions, and those are unanimous. I mean, this is the trick. You need unanimity for every step on foreign policy. So far, we've gotten it, whether we mention or not mention letters of alphabet. So I think that there is the peer pressure has been working, but it's not easy.
Well, look, I want to thank both of you. Adam Kinzinger has to run. He's got another TV hit. Katerina Martinova, I hope you'll stay with us a few minutes. We're going to bring on Representative Jake Auchincloss. I want to tell people I love the questions. Carolyn Atkinson has a great question. I will get to it. Others are sending me questions to post, which I will do so in a moment. But let me welcome Representative Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts. Jake, it's great to see you, and thank you for joining this. We've had a very robust discussion with the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee from Latvian Parliament, with you just heard the EU ambassador to Ukraine, with some of your Jim Himes and others. And I have been interested in where you're at, because you are not only interested in what America's kind of global capacity is with what, NATO, Ukraine, et cetera. You've been focused on China. And today I'm sort of interested in what problems, as we're in the week where the National Defense Authorization Act is being discussed, what do we need to fix? What are we getting wrong? What are your worry points? And I see Alexander Hamilton behind you, and I'm very thrilled by that. So
thanks for having me on, Steve. Let me start with an amen to what Representative Kinzinger was saying about strength against Russia. I think we have to look at the geopolitical reality right now vis-a-vis United States and China, United States and Russia, and then Russia and China. And what that looks like is China is probably not going to stop providing economic and industrial support for the Russian war machine. They see persisting the Russian invasion as being to their advantage. They think, I think mistakenly, but this is the CCP's calculation, that it wears down Western resolve and distracts us. I actually think they're wrong about that, but that's their calculation. But China has also, I think, been fairly clear that they are not going to meaningfully supply materiel to Russia, and they are going to reject Russian saber rattling around nuclear escalation. So if we accept those two premises, what that tells me is we have got to unleash the Ukrainian armed forces to strike Russian energy infrastructure in the Russian heartland. because the only way that the Kremlin is able to support their war machine and repivot their economy towards an industrial defense economy is through the hard currency that they're getting from energy exports. We're not going to get help from China and India on that. But we also know that Russia claiming that they're going to escalate to a nuclear level, I think, is not a particularly credible threat. And so,
but they are having tests on near the Ukrainian border right now, tactical nuclear weapon tests, just to kind of do the full record thing. Do those nuclear tests, field tests that they're doing, worry you at all?
Of course it worries me. Anytime you get a nuclear armed state led by Vladimir Putin doing nuclear tests, like, yeah, that's concerning. It's not a good thing. Should it drive our strategic decision making? No, it should not. Vladimir Putin needs to know that to the extent that he is waging this war, the Ukrainians are going to be striking the Russian energy industrial base, their troop staging sites, their economic war machine in Russia. And it's going to be persistent, it's going to be pervasive, and it's going to be designed to cripple their ability to wage war in Ukraine. Right now, we're asking Ukraine to fight with one arm tied behind its back because it can't actually hit back.
What you've been sort of talking about something interesting that I had not focused on before, Jake. That was, looking at this Article 42.7 in Europe versus Article 5 of the NATO treaty. Can you explain to us what your concerns, what your issues are within 42.7, and kind of educate our audience to that as well, because they may not be familiar?
Article 42.7 of the Treaty of Lisbon is the European Union's version of collective defense. And right. I can't give you chapter on verse in the exact legal wording, but some legal scholars would actually say that from a legal interpretation, it actually is a stronger wording than even NATO's Article 5 in the sense of requiring member states to come to each other's aid in the event of an attack. And it does precisely mention armed aggression as one of those galvanizing factors. It's only been invoked once, 2015, by France. And politically, it is perceived of as being subordinate to NATO's Article 5. But that's a political choice. And the reason I raised 42.7 is that I think it's going to be a key element of defining victory in Ukraine, which I see as a secure eastern border for Ukraine, as freedom of navigation in the Black Sea, and as accession to the European Union. And that accession to the European Union by Ukraine is going to require a security conversation about what 42.7 actually means to the agreement of Ukraine. And that conversation should probably start happening now.
Jake, I'm going to ask you a high concept question. It may kind of not fall well. I'm trying to forget to say it. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you sort of felt you had that sort of Tom Friedman, the world is flat, nations are going to all look like us. Globalization was kind of spreading trust in institutions and people and ideas more frictionlessly around the world. And now we're talking a lot. I mean, conversation is really, we're all very interconnected, but it's sort of a high fear form of globalization rather than a high trust form of globalization. And I think that particularly in the China front, we have a question here from Mike Poznansky that he texted me on whether or not there are trade-offs between what we need to do with Ukraine, say what we need to do with preparedness for Taiwan. But people are beginning to think of the world as a much more fragmented, even balkanized place where there's disaggregation going on rather than aggregation. I'm wondering, because you do think so much about China and getting these equities right, how do you navigate that map?
China is trying to be a global power. It is trying to overturn the Pax Americana rules-based order that we helped architect post-war. And Xi Jinping has been very clear about that. You listen to his speeches to the Chinese Communist Party that are meant for a domestic audience. You listen to what he said to Vladimir Putin. There's no ambiguity here. That is their goal. The great national project of rejuvenation is directed towards that. And to counter that, we need to have a global operating system that is more attractive for countries to plug into than what China is offering. And I very deliberately use that term operating system because that's really what it is. It's not just trade, it's not just investment ties, it's not just security, it's not just multilateral institutions, it's all of those things. It's a ecosystem of behavior and engagement that countries say, I want in. And in Europe, I think that looks like NATO and European Union. In the Middle East, that looks like the Abraham Accords. In Latin America, it's some version of Mercosur or other engagements. In the Indo-Pacific, I think it's keystoned by the US-Japanese security relationship, but needs to expand to a free and open Indo-Pacific concept that really should include trade ties with the TPP. In Africa, we don't really have an answer. I mean, Power Africa is a start, but we got to do a lot better than that. And I think it starts with US-Nigerian bilateral ties. Nigeria, I think, is probably the most underappreciated regional superpower in the world today. So we have to, this operating system needs to be manifested in different ways on different continents, but the thread is going to be the US working with our allies or even our fence-sitting partners to create a platform on which their citizens want to build their lives in the 21st century. We have to offer
in that
something.
Global bridge building that you're talking about. Do you feel like we're pretty tragically behind and can catch up? I should tragically behind and catching up don't go together. Do you think we're not so far behind that we can catch up, or are we tragically behind and can't catch up?
I actually don't think we're behind. I don't really accept that premise.
Okay.
We have to have I think a self-aware view of where we're at. And where we're at is we're coasting off of the success of the 20th century. And that's given us a head start. I mean, China's only been doing this for a decade. We've been doing this for 70 years in some form or another. We have a lot of substantive advantages to go with. Number one being people like freedom, law, and democracy. They don't like a techno-authoritarian surveillance state. So we got a lot going for us.
And yet there's a lot of support for those. I'll talk to you. We've got a couple of quick questions that I'd love to get into you, Jake, because I know you've got to run too. But we have Carolyn Atkinson, who's a friend, a former deputy national security advisor, said all of this is great, but how do we make the policy makers, especially in the U.S., move? Your thoughts?
Well, I'm on the select committee on China, which is designed precisely to do that. It's not a committee of jurisdiction. It is a committee of investigation, awareness, and political momentum building. And we've been successful in that. The TikTok divestment is meaningful in that we are countering an ideological strike by the Chinese Communist Party. I'm trying to build support for reauthorization of the generalized system of preferences, which is functionally a rebalancing of trade towards the global south away from China. I think we need to be thinking about our relationship with Japan and Taiwan and South Korea and Australia in more substantive and engaged ways. And that looks like the Coast Guard in the South China Sea. And that looks like getting rid of double taxation for Taiwan. So these conversations are happening. They're being done through the lens of China, which is fine. But we need to have a bargain in place where it's not just tough on China, it's tough on China plus better engagement with the rest of the world.
So thank you. I see Carolyn's face, so thank you for that. We're going to go real fast here. I also asked former Ambassador Andras Simonyi, who's at the Atlantic Council. I don't know if you have a question, but I'm so thrilled you're here. And you also were the ambassador of Hungary to the U.S. So very quick form, 30 seconds, Andras, thoughts, reactions, question for Jake Auchincloss.
Sure, I will not mention the H word.
Neither will I.
Because it breaks my heart. There are a couple of very quick comments. First comment is, I want to something that the Congresswoman was into that I think we have basically related great territory in the soft power theater, and I think it's a huge mistake. I think this used to be very much part of our strategic toolbox. The second, I don't think there is enough awareness in Washington. I'm spending a lot of time in Brussels these days. I don't think Washington is aware of the growing anti-American sentiments in Europe, and that's very dangerous. The third thing I want to say is that I don't think Washington realizes how Europeans, many Europeans, and a growing number of Europeans are taking equidistance between Europe and the United States and Europe and China. That is very dangerous. And so the bottom line is this is a fascinating conversation, but I do think that in many ways the discourse across the Atlantic needs to change in a couple of months. And I think I hope we will use the NATO summit to change the course of the conversation across the Atlantic.
Thanks so much. I was given a note that I really butchered my friend Jacques, the Swiss ambassador's name. My apologies, Jacques. I would love to invite you to make a comment or make a comment from your perspective. I want to mention the ambassador of Switzerland to the U.S. He'll be departing soon, was the former head of intelligence in Switzerland. But your thoughts, Jacques, Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. And I will be departing to NATO. I'll be the next ambassador, the Swiss ambassador to NATO. So we are in remaining in security policy. I'm totally flabbergasted by the way European countries, including mine, have become addicted to the peace dividend. And it's really an interesting phenomenon that we have been now 2 years into the process of understanding what kind of threat Europe is facing and how urgent it would be to rebuild the industrial capability, because it's not just about buying whatever is on the market, but it's recreating the industrial capability. And I see almost none of them, including not in my country. One exception maybe is France, where France has been stepping up on the production of some war materials. And we have to realize that at some point we have to go back to, if not a war economy, but a Cold War economy. And it's a very difficult decision to make, because the money that was freed by the peace dividend has been used for all sorts of clientelism, social and political clientelism. And now to go back on this and to have to tell people you'll have to tighten your belt a few notches because of national defense is a huge problem. And we've had this discussion right now in Switzerland. And after a few rounds, Parliament decided that, okay, we would give additional money to Ukraine, but in terms of recreating the industrial capacity that we used to have, have a quite an impressive, like the Finns and like the Swedes, and now it's gone. So it's and I'm also fascinated by the fact that here in the US, the defense industry is kind of in a waiting position, saying as long as we don't have a long-term commitment, we are not stepping up the production. And we are talking to them, and they say we need a long-term commitment. So as soon as this long-term commitment comes, the real American industrial machine will come into being, and then we'll see whether Russia can cope. And of course, it can't.
Terrific. Jake, I want to give you an opportunity to offer a response, thoughts, parting thoughts, and then we're going to move folks to my discussion previously held with both Senator Jim Risch that I did late last night, Doha time, where I am, and also Republican Congressman Brad Wenstrup from Ohio. So Jake, the floor is yours.
Thanks again for having me, Steve. I want to I would say that the comment that has stayed with me the most from the previous two speakers is the growing anti-American sentiment in Brussels. I would love to understand more about where that's coming from, if that's associated with the right-wing populism that is increasing in Europe, or whether that's coming from a different source. I don't know the answer to that question. I'll be interested to learn more. It's vital. I mean, NATO is the most important alliance in the world, and it's vital that it remains and strengthens its unity of purpose that starts with ensuring victory for Ukraine. And we've got to stop shying away from that word, victory. That is the goal, victory for Ukraine. And anything short of that, I think, is going to sow the seeds of further strife.
That is terrific. Well, I want to thank Jake Auchincloss, representative from Massachusetts, involved in so many of the national security committees. Thank you so much for your time, my friend, and thanks for joining us for this GLOBSEC forum. I want to remind everybody this is all on the record. This will all be put on the GLOBSEC website. This is a real experiment for us to try to bring in a lot of voices in a condensed period of time. The next two folks that we'll have on, Senator Jim Risch and Brad Wenstrup from Ohio, I had to have previous conversations given their scheduling constraints. So they're both involved with different dimensions of debates over the National Defense Authorization Act. So let us move to Senator Jim Risch. Thank you. And it's going to take about 10 seconds to get loaded up, as I understand, right, Naharika? So go ahead and start it. I hope people are having a good time. I see so many great friends here. Here we go. Senator Jim Risch, thank you so much for joining us. Listen, you're ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. You're right at the sweet spot of all the issues we're talking about in this forum online. What we're trying to look at is, are we facing any problems, substantial problems, when you look at the many conflicts that are basically popping up around the world? I've been talking to you and some of your colleagues about ammunition shortages, defense production shortages. And I'm just wondering whether there's this blind spot we collectively have, NATO has, our transatlantic relationship has, in what we need today. Because you look across the board, we're not making up enough ammo for a conflict that we're supplying a partner with, not an ally, but a partner with, not even our own war, if you will. I'm just love to get your take on that.
Well, Steve, I think, first of all, you know, I've been doing this for a while, and things are in as much turmoil as I've seen in a long time. There's parts of the world that things going on and aren't getting any attention at all. The Horn of Africa is a mess, has been for a long time, but it has been getting progressively worse. People focus on the humanitarian crisis in Hamas, in Gaza, orchestrated by Hamas. Things in the Horn are as bad, if not worse, than there, and yet it gets no attention at all. Turning to the specific question about our industrial military base and its ability to provide the things that we need, I think that number one, the supply chain and the supply issues really started to come to the forefront during COVID, and it was on everything. It wasn't just on military things.
No, refrigerators, not just ammo.
Yeah. Once the war started in Ukraine, obviously we scrambled, our NATO partners scrambled, and trying to help Ukraine get the supplies on the ground. And it became obvious very quickly that more needed to be done. And when I say that, you know, the first thing was artillery shells. Those are the things that are used in this particular war most of all. So we said, well, it's simple, you know, make more artillery shells. No, it's not that simple. The way we do this in the United States, unlike many countries, is our warfighting materials are manufactured in a free market system by the private sector. So Congress passes a bill, private sector bids on it, private sector builds a production line, does what that particular allocation of money does, and then they don't maintain that production line, generally speaking, because they're in the business to make a profit. They've got to turn it over into something else, and they do. Probably one of the most glaring ones is the HIMARS system. You know, HIMARS was very successful in Ukraine, continues to be, but there were a limited supply of HIMARS around. And as it turns out, reconstituting the production line for HIMARS is not just waving a magic wand. It takes some time and it takes some work. And we've really come to the grips with that. One of the other things that contributed with HIMARS was the fact that they were working on the next generation of HIMARS, so they were going to change anyway. But look, these are things that are not lost on us. We talk about them every day mostly in classified setting, but not always. And we're aware of it. And I think that there's been lessons learned here. We always looked after our own supply, but when you're supplying a partner, most people don't realize that we agreed on December 5th of 1994 to Ukraine that we would help them if this happened. That was the day we talked them into laying down their nuclear weapons. They were the second largest nuclear country on the planet at that time, just come out of the Soviet Union. And we said, you don't want to be like this. Get rid of your nuclear weapons and we'll be there for you if something happens. Most people don't realize that we have that commitment. Well, we have that commitment, and we have been meeting that commitment.
Do you think there's been a move right now to try to take some of the frozen Russian central bank assets that are mostly held in Belgium, actually, a big bulk of them in Belgium, but around the world, and to take some of those assets and either take the interest and earnings on those assets or the assets themselves and deploy them for Ukraine's needs? Do you think that's something that's smart policy?
Well, Steve, it was my idea, so I think it is smart policy.
Okay,
that was the repo bill that we wrote, and give you just a brief thumbnail history of it. We got pushback immediately. Anytime you're trying to seize assets or freeze assets or sanction somebody, the pushback doesn't come from the enemy. It comes from the banking and treasury departments here in the United States and around the world. Bankers hate doing this, so they're always against it. So we started. The first enemy was right up here at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, but we got through that, and the next push came from our German friends. They didn't like it, but we talked them into it, and we've shopped it all over Europe. And this thing's actually, you've probably seen, gaining some momentum. And
it's gaining some real momentum. I mean, I was just at a major forum in Estonia, and it was one of the biggest points of discussion and enthusiastic discussion.
Yeah, Estonians are really enthusiastic about it, and all the Baltics. Anytime you're seizing Russian assets, you can get the Baltics on board pretty quickly. You know, so, but in any event, yeah, it's and there's actually been some innovative ideas come along with it. The Germans took the position that, well, yeah, they could use the interest, couldn't use the principal, and of course, it doesn't make sense. If you use the principal, you could use the if you use the interest, you can use the principal. But look, I said to him, I'm fine with that. How long are you going to tap the principal till the debt's paid? You know, well, you know, hold it a long time. I'm fine with that. The Belgians came up and embraced that, but they also came up with the idea of issuing bonds and securing the bonds with the Russian assets. Again, I have no problem with that. But look, you look at that country and you see the pictures of what's happened there. There's going to be billions spent in rebuilding Ukraine when this is over, and it will be over at some point. It's really fair that the Russians pay the price for what they did. I mean, it's really simple equity as far as I'm concerned. So we're going to keep at it.
You know, Jim, one of the things coming up in here, and I'm just sort of thinking about this big meta question, which has been, you know, bothering me, is NATO. The NATO summit's coming up mid-July. That institution is going to be looking at, you know, its activities in the world, its big lift challenges in the world, its blind spots. But we also have the Israel-Gaza crisis, you know, on the sidelines, and I think that, you know, when you kind of are realistic, these many conflicts around the world involve us. And I'm interested in institutional misalignment or alignment. I won't prejudge the answer here, but when we talk about the International Criminal Court decisions, when we talk about whether or not our U.S. foreign policy, NATO's policy, is it aligned with institutions today and key allies in the world, or do we have some fundamental problems?
Well, I think, Steve, that to me, what's happening in the world is we are gravitating, and have been for a long time, but more, I think the velocity is stronger now. But we're really gravitating to a dual world. On the one side, you've got the autocracies of the world. You got North Korea, you got China, you got Russia, you got all kinds of countries, Iran, certainly Venezuela, Cuba, Syria, what I call the no-goodniks, the autocracies.
Right.
On the other side, you got the democracies or semi-democracies, and we are gravitating to that position more and more. Now, every country tries to do the best they can for themselves as to where they land, where they put their feet. That's always a challenge. But no, I think we're aligned well. I've never seen NATO aligned better than it is right now. You know, that was a mistake. Not just one of many mistakes that Putin made when he invaded Ukraine. He really believed that this was going to split NATO. It not only didn't split NATO, it made it stronger than I've ever seen it. And now we're two countries bigger than what we were when we started, and two really, really good additions to NATO that would never have come on board without that invasion. So, I'm comfortable with a lot of, but yeah, you know, diplomacy is diplomacy. You're never 100% aligned with another country's views on things. It's much like a domestic situation. You know, you negotiate and get to the best position you can and move forward. It is, you know, our American people aren't fully, they don't spend a lot of time thinking about these things, but our national security depends not just on a strong military. It certainly depends on a strong military, but it depends just as much on having strong allies around the world that you can count on to help with you, to partner with you, to move the ball forward for where you want to go. And that's always, it's like the laundry, it's never done. Every day you keep at it.
And last quickie, ICC decision, arrest warrants, your thoughts?
Yeah, really bad idea on the ICC's part. Look, the ICC exists in order to hold accountable people that would not ordinarily be held accountable for war crimes and atrocities. If you have a country that it's a democracy, that has an independent judiciary that pursues these things themselves, like the United States does, we catch one of our people that are doing something wrong, we prosecute. We don't cover for them. We don't try to coddle that sort of thing. No country like ours, and that includes Israel, should be gone after by the ICC. It's just not their job. It gives them a bad reputation. It gets them involved in political situations they shouldn't be involved in. So I think this was a very bad idea. We're on a bipartisan basis pursuing bringing back sanctions against people who work at the ICC who've actually gone after, for instance, GIs from Afghanistan, which was in place during the last administration, and then this administration pulled that down. We're going to try to do that again. We're going to be adding the ICC people that are going way beyond what their job is.
Well, Senator Jim Risch of Idaho, good friend, I want to thank you for taking time out of your long and complex day to join us today in our forum discussing many of these issues. Thanks so much, Senator.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be with you as always. Thank you.
All right, we're back now. As you can probably tell, we have our cup overfloweth with members of Congress, both parties who wanted to address these issues. And what needs to be done. And our welcome, everyone, and welcome Congressman Brad Wenstrup of Ohio. He served in Congress since, 2013, and he's decided to hang things up at the end of this year. But you have been someone, former Army Reserve officer, and I was honored. I want to tell the audience I was honored to go to your retirement ceremony for that wonderful service you provided the country, Brad. And today we're here talking. We've got a number of congressmen, we've got European officials and others. And really, what I'm trying to get at is, do we have blind spots when it comes to thinking about our collective security, transatlantic security? We have a lot of hotspots in the world. And when it comes to everything from defense production to cybersecurity to biohazards internationally, I'm just interested in your long experience as someone in the military who's also served in Congress. What would make your top three worries?
Well, there's several today, and things have certainly changed. I'd say even in the past, 10 years, certainly in the past 20 years. When you look back, Steve, we were fighting terrorism. I mean, that became the cry after 9/11, 2001, and we got pretty good at it. We have not had a terrorist attack in our country. But in the meantime, some of our near-peer adversaries have been developing more of their capabilities and trying to expand their authorities around the world. That is a concern to us. And then, we can get into what we see from COVID, especially as that we have threats on the health side. And for example, bioweapons, biosecurity, so the technology exists. It's pretty clear there's technology that exists that we can create new viruses. You can take parts
you could actually create pathogens and wipe out a lot of folks.
Right, and that is a concern, and what is the medic in the field going to do when a pathogen just, goes across the battlefield, if you will, or other things, innocent civilians right here at home. So those concerns are there, and I don't think they're unrecognized at this time. I just think we have a lot of making up to do. It's, as much as we are always going to be concerned, about ships and tanks and planes and weapon systems, how can we defend ourselves in our defense systems? And we do pretty well with standard things. What we, also, Steve, we're in kind of a Cold War here. There's non-kinetic things that are being done all the time, cyber attacks, etc. And we have got to be on guard for these types of things and be able to remedy them. And I'm one that's always encouraging peace through strength. And if we can be strong on all the offensive things, as well as being able to defend ourselves and our health, then we're going to be in a better position than I think we are today. And we need to do more.
Well, look, I mean, I think what you said is very important. And I think that the objective is very clear. The question is there the capacity, the behavior, the norms in place to achieve that kind of security? And I've talked, I don't want to name individual names, but I've talked to people at Palantir, at Google, at CrowdStrike, and others, you know, in the cyber business who've watched Ukraine actually change, you know, how a battlefield works and digitize this. But they said to me, you know, in confidence, the Pentagon needs to learn something from Ukraine. The Pentagon doesn't buy software like Ukraine is acquiring it today and applying it right away. That the procurement process, and then that's before you get into ammo. We don't make enough ammo in the world for the hotspots we have, and reserves have been brought down the world, and it's very hard to ramp that up. So I'm just interested in, as we sort of talk about peace through strength, is it hard for us, the way we're organized today, to be strong?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that we've got to make sure that we can procure a manufacturing base, a domestic manufacturing base, or at least do things with our allies. Let's just take health for a second. You know, it's not a secret anymore that when it comes to generic medications, even our battlefield medications, we rely down to the root cause, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, that we rely on China. And that's a danger to us. If they cut those off, if they quit manufacturing, if we aren't able to pick up that steam, then we've got a problem. And I don't want to be out on the battlefield trying to take care of troops and not have what I need, because the very adversary we're fighting controls that industry. And so we have to look across all industries and enhance what we need for our national security and our national defense, our national health. I mean, quite frankly, if I don't care if China makes the toys for my kids, but I do care if they're making the things, and only they can contribute to things that we need for our transportation, for our health, and for our military.
Well, Brad, you've introduced a piece of legislation to that point. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's the Biosecurity Act, and it's a good bipartisan bill that's come out of essentially the Select China Committee. I chair the Select Subcommittee on the pandemic, and obviously there's some overlap here with our concerns. But the Biosecurity Act is now putting a timeline to challenge industry to really take a look at where they're getting things. And we cannot continue to allow, for example, our adversaries to be creating the equipment that will then capture your DNA and my DNA and understand more about us. We have to break ourselves free from the things that can be used as a tool against us someday by a known adversary. And so that's what we're after. And this goes to pharmaceuticals too. But this is going to be twofold, because it's not only those that are in the industry that have built their industry relying on China one way or another, or any other countries of concern. We have to look at the ways and see what they need. What can our government do to enhance the capabilities here? In other words, are there regulations that are in our way to prevent us from developing medications here, what the active pharmaceutical ingredients and other rules and regulations make it difficult for us to do these things here in the United States? Is it a cost factor? You know, we did something to this effect with semiconductors, right? With the CHIPS Act. We recognize that we can't be reliant on foreign countries or adversary for the production of chips. And this is affecting our everyday life, right? But now you got to think about beyond that. It's not just your car needing chips. It's our everyday way of life we need to sustain our health and our security.
Brad, the NATO summit is going to be hosted in Washington, D.C. in July. And I don't know what President Trump is going to be out there and saying, but you've long been both a leader on national security issues that matter around the world. You've been a leader. You also tell people you're in the Doctors Caucus, which I really find interesting and fun. But as this summit is going on, are these kind of issues, like you discussed AI and competition there, you discussed the Biosecurity Act and this, do you think we need to tighten up our relationship with NATO ally nations on these objectives and issues that's valuable to our own security? And do you think that there is a strong support for that in the caucus, the Republican caucus?
Oh yeah, I think there is for sure. NATO is hugely needed. You know, it came out of World War II. We're about to celebrate the 70th year history of NATO, which was designed to make peace through strength, right? And really protect our European allies from Russia and other enemies that may want to seek harming them in one way, shape, or another. So I think we're all on board. And I think when you see the aggressive nature of Putin right now in Ukraine and his desire, even back 20 years ago, to reestablish the USSR, I think there's an understanding there. I think it is important, though, that it has to be important to every member of NATO. It can't just be, well, let's let the United States take care of this. We're only as strong as our members. And so the conversation, as you know, in the Trump administration was everyone should be paying their fair share and doing their part, 2% of GDP. You need to do this. It'll save us in the long run. The stronger we are on the front end, the less likely we need to go to war and do other things. And I think that's the point. And I think NATO has good leadership, and we just need to tighten it up and make sure that we're all coming together and doing our part in a fair way. I mean, obviously, the United States has more capabilities than other countries in NATO, but let's do a good percentage of what is necessary to strengthen the military in each way, because we need all these extenders of force.
You know, another element here, just real quick, is, you know, I was just thinking of humorously, sometimes, you know, on cable TV, it's Shark Week. This is National Defense Authorization Week. And I'm interested in what you think needs to be written in. What are the blind spots you think we have that we need to fix in the NDAA really immediately, because that's what you and colleagues are working on right now?
Well, I think we need to really make sure that we're taking the time, and I think we have been over the last several years, to really evaluate our adversaries, what their intentions are, and then how do we counter that? And then how do we get ourselves in a position that they don't want to mess with us because they know the results for them will be worse. And you know, Steve, you do that through a lot of things. It's not all just guns and ships and planes and tanks. What can we do diplomatically? And how do we work with our State Department to do things diplomatically? Our military, obviously, you want to be a strength, but our last resort, especially for kinetic warfare. What can we do economically to weaken our enemies that are out there? And then with our allies, you know, we can do things like sharing of intelligence and things like that can make us strong. So we have to focus, I think, on that, and making sure that our own training and readiness is up to speed for what is needed. There's a reason that we added a Space Force, because that's another area of concern, another area of threat. And let's face it, it's the ultimate high ground. And I think when we were in a position, we were sending that space shuttle up every so often and nobody else could do that, we were pretty dominant there, but that's not how it is today. And so we're in a different situation where there is clearly a Cold War going on. And let's try to avoid the kinetic war.
So final question, you sit on the House Select Committee on Intelligence. You've mentioned the Cold War a couple of times that we're in. During the real Cold War that we had in the past, you know, the American CIA and our institutions were pretty good at messing around in other countries. That, you know, we were good at operations inside the old Soviet Union. And I've been interested in the issue of how, in the area of disinformation and cyber sabotage, et cetera, I know we have, you know, capable abilities in cyber command and cyber response. But when it comes to the disinformation side of this, why aren't we delivering a message to, you know, Vladimir Putin and Russia on the disinformation side, showing what we can do? Or have all those muscles atrophied?
They've atrophied somewhat because of the control that China, Russia has over what their people can see and understand. Whereas we're a much freer society and there's this influence through social media that we don't necessarily like. that our adversaries are using. We have to do better. And I will also say it's been tougher on human intelligence because it's much more difficult to penetrate within these countries. And part of that is because of technology. It's very difficult to be as secretive on the human side, but we have to continue to build relationships and do what we can in those areas. But it's definitely more challenging than it was years ago.
Well, I want to thank Congressman Brad Wenstrup of Ohio. Thanks so much for your time today. I know it's busy. Really appreciate you supporting this GLOBSEC discussion. Thanks, my friend.
Always glad to be with you, Steve. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm back. I want to thank for everybody's patience. You know, sometimes when you're trying to basically put all of these voices together, you got to tape a couple of them. I thought they had some very, very interesting and important insights. We're right at the end, and I just want to say thank you to all of you. There's still 45 of us left. I feel like you guys deserve a special credit or something. I want to thank again a couple of people here because they inspired part of today's discussion, and our Helga Kam and Eva Eek Padrus. They may not have known I was going to thank them, but I thought the Leonard Mary conference in Estonia was really terrific when raising a number of the issues that we discussed. I also want to thank, I've got really great names on here. All of you are great names. We worked hard to get people who were deeply thoughtful from a wider range of views. My friend Jacob Habron, the editor of National Interest, is on board here. We've got Kaylee Kreider, former right hand to Al Gore. Ken Weisbrod, really great public intellectual for a long time. Mike Miller of Intel. Nobuo Tanaka, great friend from the internet, formerly of the International Energy Agency, but he's kind of a guru of tech, innovation, energy right now in Seoul, Korea, joining us at some ungodly hour. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us for GLOBSEC. I want to thank Elena Kutsko, Kara King, Naharika Acharya, Peter Poodle, and others on the GLOBSEC side of this that helped put this together. And I promise you, we will do more of these because we like punctuation points that a lot of people, it was not hard to get all these people to come in. In fact, we had probably a couple too many, but we wanted to take advantage of this first time. So we'll be in touch with all of you. Hope you'll come back. And thank you all very much for joining us for this online global GLOBSEC forum. Thank you very much.